So let's move it along to his replacement. We've already seen a little bit of Liam Lawson when he stood in for Daniel, when he had that fracture on his hand that put him out for a few races. I think 5 races Liam did during that time. Very solid. He was one of, you'll probably correct me if I got that number wrong, but he was one of the few people to actually overtake Max in that dominant victory around Zandvoort because of that wet transitional race. And then I guess I don't recall any other sort of big standout races thereafter, but he was definitely showed himself as a worthy of an opportunity in Formula One. So out with one from Australia, in with another from New Zealand. You've seen him in the lower formulas. What's the sort of bigger picture on how he races? If we reflect on Daniel as one of the biggest overtakers, the biggest breakers, what can you tell us as an insight to what we can expect from Liam?
You know, I knew this question was coming, and I feel kind of the same about Liam Lawson as I did about Franco Colapinto. There would be races where he'd be absolutely rapid, and you'd think he was a surefire bet for Formula One. And there'd be races where you wouldn't say his name on the broadcast. And then the longer he went at it, the more we saw that consistency might be because he was never with one of what I call the factory teams, like an ART or a Prema that bring through driving talent week in, week out. He was never with one of those. So he had to take the wins when he got the opportunity. If you look at his last year in Formula 2, he took 4 wins, but they were all on the reverse grid races. The one thing that you would say, though, the flashes of speed that were there are twinned with this wonderful adaptability. He's quick in everything, DC. He's quick in DTM. He's quick in Super Formula. He was quick in Formula 3. He was quick in the Toyota Racing Series in New Zealand. He was a race winner in Formula 2. He's beaten some big names who have made it to Formula 1. And I think around Oscar Piastri's introduction to Formula 1, there was a key thing that the adaptability, like, you know, being a sort of, 8 out of 10 in every category rather than being, 10 out of 10 in late braking, for example, has crept in more and more and more in teams' thinkings. And I think that Liam Lawson is just so adaptable and so quick in every championship he's ever been in. Alex Albon was in the DTM championship that he raced in. Lawson, really young at this point, rookie season, he was ahead of Alex. Consistently. Well, that's a guy that everyone in the paddock rates, and Red Bull have the data on. So I can see why they've given him the chance. And yeah, I expect him to be immediately competitive and to be fighting toe-to-toe with Yuki at the very least. He beat him a couple of times, scored points in those 5 races. So yeah, I think there's a lot to work with Liam Lawson.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, actually, what you point out there about adaptability. If I reflect on my own career, I was very sort of, analog in my approach to I raced what I raced and then I moved to the next thing. And it was later in my life in racing that starting to jump into different vehicles for a bit of fun. Race of Champions, actually, an end of season event, kind of opened my eyes to that, where you find yourself in a NASCAR or you find yourself in a buggy. And it may seem that around a little football stadium, why is that challenging? Well, the limit's the limit in whatever vehicle you drive. And it did, I regret not doing more earlier in my career because I think it gives you flexibility in your mind to deal with what you've got. So that might well be his little, special little thing up his sleeve, the fact that he is so adaptable and clearly to any of them coming from that part of the world, they can't get homesick. They've got to be full on and committed. Good looking boy, speaks well. Yeah, maybe that little tickle with Formula One, then step back, observe, come back again, makes him one of the best prepared rookies of that. He doesn't probably deserve that title, but first full-time contract. So we wish him well with that journey. And the goal has to be to beat Yuki, because Yuki has certainly shown himself to be deserving of his place in Formula One, but we just haven't really, beyond Daniel, had a way of gauging where he is. Is he Max fast, Lewis fast, or is he a number one minus or a number two plus, as I affectionately like to call them, knowing that I, on my best, maybe could be a number one minus. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how he adapts to that. Coming at this stage of the season might not be a bad thing, actually. There might be a bit of racing fatigue for Yuki in that case.
It's really intriguing. I was also really interested to hear Christian Horner's comments that it's part of a wider, not audition, but there's an opportunity for him to put himself not just in the discussion for a VCARB or RB seat, but the actual senior team as well. And this is Christian Horner on the record. This isn't any insider goss. This was on the record, public comments to Formula One, saying it's part of a wider picture. So he's got this strange thing, DC, where he's got 6 Grand Prix. He's worked for this his entire life. He's not from his dad didn't race or anything like that. He's not from a racing background. So they started from scratch. And he's got to Europe. He succeeded. He's come up through Formula 3, Formula 2. And now he's in this situation where he might get himself a contract at RB. He might get himself a contract at Red Bull. At which point you've got to be Max Verstappen's teammate. I mean, it's a bizarre thing. In 7 races' time, Melbourne next year, he could be not on the grid at all, in a VCARB or in a Red Bull. And that is bewildering stuff.
It is indeed a slightly confusing set of opportunities there for him. And I guess it all hinges around Checo Perez. And again, the rumour mill is very much that he might announce his retirement in Mexico and then that will be it, or he might see out the year, or he has a contract in place. So it is a tricky one, isn't it? You mentioned Colapinto earlier. I hadn't really his name hadn't been passing my ears a lot. And then he comes into Formula One, and I think the guy has done a brilliant job.
Yeah.
Really solid, quick, definitely justifying James Vowles' decision to drop Logan Sargent. Never nice to see a driver going out mid-season and all of the difficulties that brings with it. But we have spoken about this many times. This isn't show friends, it's show business, and it's about performance. And if you're not performing, we'd put Ronaldo on the bench if he isn't scoring goals. So why should we be so compassionate towards race drivers? And I guess it's the nature of the sport that we historically sign to, and you sort of make do with them, don't you, until later in the year, which throws open another question, actually. Should we actually have super subs there that can be brought off the bench? But I guess it's so difficult in our sport because it's circuit dependent and circumstance dependent. That probably couldn't work.
But you had it when you came in, obviously difficult circumstances in 1994. You were in for a bit, test driver, then promoted to race driver.
Yeah.
And then they brought back Nigel Mansell for a bit. I know Martin Brundle shared a seat in 1995. There used to be a mad hire and fire culture, didn't there? That used to get drivers dropped for fun, but then we had more teams on the grid. So there was a little bit more luxury for those at the back to do that. But yeah, I think the entire paddock is shouting no at you, DC, for the idea of having super subs off the bench.